I'll never forget the way she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not the laugh of someone hiding shame, but a sharp, mocking one. Like the past 20 years of my life were just a bad joke to her. We were sitting in that sterile courtroom, the smell of old paper and cheap coffee hanging in the air, and my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, was grinning ear to ear. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Finally, freedom. He can keep his stubborn pride. I'll take everything else." The judge barely looked up. To her, it was just another Thursday. But to me, it was the final nail in a coffin I didn't build. You'd think after months of lawyers, mediators, and endless paperwork, I'd be numb. I wasn't. My stomach burned with every smirk she threw my way. She thought she'd already won, that I'd walk out of there broken, stripped down to nothing while she walked away with the house, the car, and whatever alimony her attorney could squeeze out of me. To her, this was a victory lap. She had no idea what was coming. The clerk rattled off the last of the settlement terms. My wife's lawyer whispered something, and she chuckled under her breath like a schoolgirl who'd gotten away with cheating on a test. My hands tightened on the table. I wanted to shout, to call her out for every betrayal, every lie, every late night she claimed was overtime. But I didn't. I just sat there, silent, because I knew the moment wasn't mine, it was the judge's. And when that moment came, it hit like a thunderclap. "Before we finalize," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "I want to acknowledge Mr. Harrison's declared net worth on record." She tapped the folder, shuffled a few pages, and then read the number aloud. The courtroom went dead quiet. My wife's smile froze in place. Her laugh choked in her throat. For the first time since this circus started, she looked genuinely confused. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I just watched as her eyes widened, her hand gripping the arm of her chair until her knuckles turned white. That number wasn't the one she expected. Not even close. See, while she spent the last decade treating me like her safe, predictable fallback, the man who paid the bills while she sought excitement elsewhere, I was building something she never cared to ask about. Investments, properties, partnerships. Quietly, patiently, I stacked every brick. And now, the empire she thought she was entitled to wasn't just bigger than she imagined. It was untouchable. The judge cleared her throat. "Mrs. Harrison, I hope you understood the terms when you waived your rights to equitable distribution." My wife blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she'd forgotten how to breathe. That was when I allowed myself the smallest smile. Because what she thought was her grand escape was about to turn into her greatest mistake. And that was only the beginning. The silence after the judge's words stretched on like an eternity. My wife's attorney leaned over to whisper, but she shoved his hand away, eyes fixed on me like I had somehow tricked her, like I had pulled a fast one. But that was the thing, there was no trick. Every document had been signed. Every choice she made was her own. She was so blinded by greed and arrogance that she never once asked the right questions. She cleared her throat and forced out a laugh, thin and shaky this time. "This must be a mistake," she said, glancing at the judge. "He's hiding something. He always hides things." Her voice rose, frantic, as if she could undo the ink already dried on her signature. The judge shook her head. "Mrs. Harrison, you waived your rights in exchange for expedited proceedings and the immediate cash settlement you demanded. Are you saying now that you signed those documents without fully understanding them?" The weight in the judge's tone wasn't sympathetic. It was sharp, almost mocking. A warning to watch her step. My wife's bravado crumbled. I saw it in the twitch of her jaw, the way she gripped the table like she might fall over. For months, she'd strutted through this process like she was walking a victory parade. She thought she would crush me, walk out with half of everything, and maybe more. But now she was the one trapped, caught in the very net she cast. I leaned forward just enough for her to hear me. "Funny thing," I said quietly. "You always told me I was predictable. Turns out you were the one easy to read." Her eyes narrowed, but there was no fire behind them anymore. Just panic. The judge scribbled her notes and pushed the file aside. Then it settled. Divorce finalized. The gavel cracked against the block. That sound, to me, was freedom. But for her, it was the sound of a prison door slamming shut. She tried one last desperate move, turning to me as if suddenly she could summon back 20 years of love and loyalty with a single expression. "We can talk, can't we? Just you and me. Maybe we rushed this." Her words shook, dripping with fear she couldn't hide anymore. I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked down at her. No, we didn't rush anything. You just never thought the finish line would look like this. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, but as I pushed open the heavy oak doors, I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't going to take her defeat quietly, and I had a feeling her desperation would soon turn dangerous. Because a woman who laughs at destroying a marriage doesn't just walk away when the tables turn. The air outside the courthouse hit me like a splash of cold water, sharp and bracing. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. But that feeling lasted only seconds. My phone buzzed before I even reached the parking lot. Her name lit up the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. You think this is funny? She hissed the second I answered. Her voice was venom now, stripped of courtroom bravado. You humiliated me in there. You set me up. I didn't stop walking. No, Karen. You set yourself up. I just let the truth catch up to you. You're not going to get away with this, she spat. I'll appeal. I'll drag you back to court. You think a little paperwork and some smug grin means you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. I paused by my car, let the silence hang heavy, then said softly, that's where you're wrong. I know exactly what you're capable of, and that's why I planned ahead. She cursed so loudly I had to hold the phone away. Then the line went dead. I leaned against the car and laughed, not out of joy, but relief. Because that call told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't done. She was going to fight, claw, and scrape for anything she thought she could still take from me. And that was fine, because I had kept something back, something she didn't know about. Yet, that night, I sat in my study, going through the files I had tucked away in a locked cabinet. Copies of receipts, contracts, signed documents where she'd rushed to grab a quick payout instead of demanding her fair share. She had traded permanent rights for temporary comfort. She thought I was desperate to close the book, when in reality I was turning pages in a story she hadn't even started reading. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message. A photo of her at some downtown bar, holding up a glass of wine, smiling that same smug smile she wore in the courtroom. The caption read, "Here's to fresh starts without dead weight." Dead weight. That's what I had been reduced to in her eyes. A man who carried her for 2 decades, who kept a roof over her head, who supported every half-baked dream she ever had. And now I was nothing but an anchor she had finally cut loose. I stared at that photo for a long time. My anger should have boiled over, but instead something colder settled in. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. She thought the fight was about dignity, about pride. But she was wrong. It was about something far more valuable, control. And the one thing she didn't realize was that by laughing in that courtroom, by mocking me, she had given me exactly what I needed. Every reason to show her what true loss feels like. And what she didn't know was that the real war hadn't even started yet. Because while she raised her glass in some bar surrounded by strangers, I was planning the one move that would make sure she never laughed at me again. 2 days after the divorce was finalized, I got the first sign of her desperation. A thick envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a letter from her attorney, a new one, not the smug shark she'd paraded in court. This one was aggressive, full of bluster. They were requesting clarification on financial disclosures, hinting at irregularities that might justify reopening the case. I sat at my desk, turning the pages slowly, savoring every hollow threat. She thought she'd found a crack in the foundation. What she didn't know was that I'd poured concrete into every seam long before the gavel hit the block. My finances were layered, protected, audited by people who made a living ensuring there were no loose ends. I called my lawyer. He chuckled as I read him the letter. It's smoke, nothing more. She signed away her rights, and the court has the paperwork. If she wants to throw money at another attorney, let her. She's digging her own grave. I hung up smiling. Every hour she spent trying to undo her mistake was another dollar out of her shrinking pocket. But I knew Karen too well. She wouldn't stop there. That night, as I closed up the house, I noticed a car idling at the end of my street. A white Lexus. Windows tinted too dark. It sat there for nearly 20 minutes before pulling away. I wasn't paranoid. I knew what it meant. She'd hired someone to watch me, to dig where her lawyers couldn't. I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark living room, thinking about the irony. For years, she never once cared how I spent my time, where I went, what I was building. Now, suddenly, she wanted to know everything. She thought she could expose me, corner me. But the truth was simple. There was nothing to expose. At least, not the way she imagined. I had been preparing for this war long before she realized there was one. While she was sneaking around with her new life, I was buying up quiet assets in other states, registering companies under holding firms she couldn't trace. She thought I was just a man with a salary, a retirement account, and a mortgage. She had no idea I was worth 10 times what she assumed. And the best part? She couldn't touch a cent. The next morning, she called. Not yelling this time. Her tone was soft, almost sweet. Maybe we should meet, she said. Talk. No lawyers. Just us. After all, we shared 20 years together. Doesn't that mean something? I almost laughed out loud. She wasn't reaching out because she missed me. She was reaching out because she was cornered. 20 years means I know exactly who you are, I said. And that's why we're not meeting. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with all the words she wanted to say but didn't dare. Then she snapped. You can't just walk away like this. You owe me. Owe her. As if loyalty, faithfulness, sacrifice, and building a life together had been nothing more than a down payment on her future ambitions. I ended the call without another word. What she didn't know was that I'd already put something in motion. Something she couldn't stop, couldn't undo, and wouldn't see coming until it hit her like a freight train. Because she thought she was fighting me in court. She hadn't realized the real battle was going to take place in her own life, in front of everyone she was so desperate to impress. And when it landed, her laughter would finally die for good. It started small, barely noticeable cracks in the perfect image she tried to polish. A mutual friend, Greg, called me one evening. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. Hey man, I don't mean to stir the pot, but Karen's been saying some wild things about you. Stuff about hidden accounts, shady business, even tax evasion. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. Let her talk, I said. Every lie she tells digs her deeper when the truth comes out. And it did, faster than I expected. A week later, one of her accusations reached the wrong person. My accountant, a man whose career was built on airtight ledgers and spotless records, called me in fury. She's trying to smear you? After you carried her for 2 decades? Let me tell you something. Your books are cleaner than a hospital floor. If she pushes this, I'll personally testify to it. Karen hadn't just underestimated me. She'd underestimated the people who had quietly benefited from my success. The ones who weren't going to let some bitter ex-wife ruin a system that worked in their favor. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. I started hearing stories. Karen showing up drunk at a bar, ranting to anyone who would listen about how she was cheated in the divorce. She'd flash her empty left hand, wave her glass around, and laugh too loud, as if volume could drown out the humiliation. And then came the gala. She had been invited months ago, back when she was still the polished wife of a respectable man. Now, she went alone, clinging to the idea that she was still somebody. I hadn't planned on going, but when an old colleague told me she'd be there, I knew it was an opportunity too good to waste. The ballroom buzzed with polite chatter when I arrived. Karen was already at the bar, holding court with a group of acquaintances. She spotted me instantly. Her smile faltered. Patrick, she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. Didn't expect to see you here. I raised my glass, supporting the cause, just like old times. Her eyes narrowed. She hated that I looked calm, composed, like a man at peace. Because she wasn't. She was unraveling, and she knew it. Later that night, during a quiet moment, one of the board members pulled me aside. Your ex-wife's been talking, trying to stir things up, but people see through it. She doesn't look stable. You, on the other hand, he patted my shoulder. You look like a man who knows how to handle himself. I thanked him, but inside, I was already smiling. Because this was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Her credibility crumbling in public, her reputation slipping away in whispers she couldn't control. When I left the gala, Karen was still at the bar, laughing too loud at some stranger's joke, her glass raised high. But her eyes told the real story. Tired, frantic, desperate. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the world saw her the way I already did. Because the next move I had planned wouldn't just end her little smear campaign. It would leave her standing alone in the ruins of the image she once treasured more than our entire marriage. The morning after the gala, I got the call I'd been waiting for. It was from Carol, one of Karen's oldest friends, the kind who thrived on gossip but also knew where loyalty paid best. Her voice was cautious, almost conspiratorial. Patrick, I thought you should know. Karen's been trying to convince our circle that you're hiding millions offshore. But the problem is, no one believes her anymore. Honestly, people are starting to avoid her. She drinks too much, talks too loud, and every word out of her mouth makes her look unhinged. I thought you'd want to hear it from me. I thanked her, hung up, and let the silence wash over me. There it was, confirmation that Karen wasn't just losing the fight. She was losing the one thing she valued more than money, her reputation. But I wasn't done. Not yet. 2 nights later, I made my move. I invited her parents to dinner. Not at my house, but at the country club they loved so much, the one I had helped them join years ago. The same place Karen used to boast about bringing her perfect husband to show off. When they arrived, they looked uneasy. I could tell Karen had already been spinning her version of events. Her father's eyes were sharp, ready for confrontation. Her mother's face was tight, lips pursed like she'd swallowed something sour. I thought it was time we talked openly. I began once the waiter left us with wine. You deserve to hear the truth without the filter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rant. I simply slid a folder across the table. Inside, copies of the settlement, proof of her signature waiving rights, and the accountant's clean records of my finances. Her father's brow furrowed as he read. She signed this. Voluntarily, I said. She was in a rush to get her cash and move on. And now that she realizes what she threw away, she's trying to smear me. But those are her choices, not mine. Her mother's eyes flicked to me, then to the documents, then down to the tablecloth. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she always did think she was the clever one. That was the crack. The moment the foundation gave way. Because once her parents stopped believing her story, the rest of her fragile image would collapse like dominoes. By the time dessert came, they weren't defending her anymore. They were asking me if I was holding up all right. When I left the club that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt complete. Because Karen had always lived for appearances. And now, those appearances were shattering in the one place she thought she was untouchable, her family's approval. Later, she called me, voice shaking with rage. You went to my parents? You dare humiliate me like that? I let the silence stretch, then said, No, Karen. You humiliated yourself. I just showed them the truth you tried to bury. Her scream on the other end was raw, guttural. Then the line went dead. And that's when I knew. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was desperate. Which meant the real collapse was only days away. The first real crack came when the bank called me. Not about my accounts. Those were bulletproof, but about hers. Mr. Harrison, we just wanted to confirm. The voice on the other end said politely, Your ex-wife attempted to access a line of credit against the house last week. Since the property is now solely in your name, her application was denied. We thought you should be aware in case she tries again. I thanked them, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. So there it was, proof that her cash grab was running dry. The lump sum she'd taken during the divorce was shrinking fast, and instead of adapting, she was clawing for more. And that desperation was starting to show everywhere. Greg, the same friend who had warned me about her gossip, sent me a message the next day. Saw Karen at the cafe this morning. She was ranting about you to the barista like a lunatic. People were staring. Thought you should know. It was happening. The polished, untouchable image she had built for years was cracking in public, not just behind closed doors. And I wasn't even lifting a finger. But I did have one final move left in me. The neighborhood association was hosting its annual dinner. A quiet, formal event where couples showed off their stability, their wealth, their perfect lives. Karen loved those dinners. She used to drag me there, always eager to shine in front of the people she thought mattered. I hadn't attended the last 2 years. But this year, I RSVP'd yes. When I walked into that banquet hall, conversations shifted. Heads turned. Not toward me, but toward her. She was already there, sitting at a table with 2 acquaintances, trying too hard to look like she belonged. Her smile was brittle, her eyes darting nervously. She froze when she saw me. The evening unfolded slowly. People approached me, shook my hand, asked how I was adjusting. I kept my answers simple, polite, never once mentioning her. And the more I carried myself with calm dignity, the smaller she seemed in comparison. Halfway through dinner, her mask slipped. A neighbor, innocent, curious, asked her how she was managing post-divorce. She laughed too loudly, waved her glass, and snapped. Better than him. He thinks he's some big success, but he's nothing without me. The table went quiet. Eyes shifted from her to me. I simply smiled and took a sip of my wine. That silence was louder than any accusation I could have made. In that moment, she didn't just look bitter, she looked unhinged. Later that night, as I left, one of the board members stopped me at the door. You've handled yourself with real class, Patrick. Not many men could have managed it this way. I shook his hand, thanked him, and walked out into the cool night air. Behind me, I could still hear Karen's raised voice, brittle and desperate, as she tried to claw back the attention that had already shifted away from her. Her world was collapsing, brick by brick. And tomorrow, I was going to deliver the final blow, the one she would never recover from. The final nail came not in court, not in private, but in the one arena she had always worshipped, public opinion. A week after the neighborhood dinner, I received an invitation to a charity luncheon downtown. It was the type of event Karen would never miss. Society names, cameras flashing, champagne flowing. Sure enough, her name was on the program as one of the hosts. She thought this was her chance to reclaim her throne, to show the world she was still someone important. I went, not to mingle, not to network, but to finish what she had started. The ballroom buzzed with polite chatter when I arrived. Karen was already working the crowd, her laughter a little too sharp, her gestures a little too rehearsed. When she spotted me, the smile on her face faltered before she plastered it back on. Patrick, she said, her voice dripping with false charm. I didn't know you'd be here. Supporting the cause? I said simply, then walked away. I didn't need to linger. I knew what was coming. Halfway through the luncheon, the keynote speaker began, thanking the sponsors, listing the hosts. And then, as the screens behind him flashed photos of the contributors, a different slide appeared. Not from the organizers. From me. A simple black background, white text, integrity matters. Some waive it for cash. Then, in bold letters, Karen signed waiver from our divorce settlement, projected 20 feet high for the entire room to see. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen shot up from her chair, her face drained of color. That's private. She screamed, her voice cracking. But it was too late. People were already whispering, already putting the pieces together. Everyone who had heard her stories about me now saw the truth. She hadn't been cheated. She had cheated herself. She lunged toward the projector operator, but security was faster. They escorted her out, her shrill protests echoing down the marble hallway. The room fell silent, then slowly shifted back to polite conversation, as if she had already been erased. I sat quietly at my table, sipping my wine. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't gloated. I had simply revealed the truth she tried so hard to bury. And in that truth, she was finished. By the end of the week, her so-called friends stopped returning her calls. Her parents, embarrassed beyond measure, distanced themselves. The attorney she'd hired dropped her as a client. Her credit dried up, her social calendar emptied, and the woman who once laughed at me in a courtroom now sat alone in an apartment she could barely afford. As for me, I walked away with my dignity, my wealth intact, and, most importantly, peace. Because the lesson was simple. She thought she could laugh at me while finalizing the divorce. But in the end, I was the one laughing, quietly, calmly, while she watched her world burn down around her. And this time, there was no rebuilding.